Hi, folks. This is Harold Ree with the Paw Print Animal Rescue Podcast. We're very excited to bring you Mark Dillon, host of Mark Dillon's Plant-Based Conversations. Before that, just want to let you know that, as we've mentioned in a previous episode, Montreal had a pit bull ban that was up for vote, and Montreal did vote in favor of a pit bull ban. It wasn't unanimous, but definitely majority rules. And as expected, the Montreal SPCA is filing lawsuit to really focus on the pit bull aspect of the law, which I think a lot of us, including the Montreal SPCA, finds terribly unfair. So sending positive thoughts to the people of Montreal. Also just want to let you know that it can get a little bit confusing with Mark Dillon's show because he did have a name change. Originally, his show was called The Mindful Vegan. That's the Mindful Vegan podcast, and he's recently changed it to Mark Dillon's Plant-Based Conversations. Simple way to find him is just go to markdillon.com. That's MarkDillon.com. Thanks, and on to the show.
This is Paw Print, an animal rescue community, episode 77. I'm Nancy Ree.
And I'm Harold Ree.
Today's guest is the talented Mark Dillon, host of the podcast called Mark Dillon's Plant-Based Conversations.
You know, this dog is sitting on my lap, and I sat there like, oh my goodness, I want to adopt this dog. And she had a sister there, and so I said to one of the people working there, I think I'll adopt both. She said this. She said, have you ever had a puppy?
Mark has a terrific animal rescue story, along with his own journey on becoming a vegan. You can learn more about Mark Dillon by going to thisispawprint.com/77. That's the number 77.
I have a new podcast called Mindful Vegan, which is where I speak about how we can bring great vegan food into our life. And so I've been talking with different entrepreneurs and chefs and cookbook authors, and it's all ways that we can gather inspiration and motivation to keep bringing vegan food into our life. So that's kind of been who I am recently. I do find that we do have a few animal rescue guests who are vegan. For me, it really started off kind of accidentally. I had been doing a lot of work and eating kind of the standard American diet. One evening, I was really tired. I'm going home. I want to stop and get something to eat. I pull into, as most people do, a fast food restaurant. It was a McDonald's, and they had a special at the time of Big Macs. It was not just the standard Big Mac. They were offering what they called double Big Mac. So instead of 2 whole beef patties, they had 4 whole beef patties on each of these, and I decided to have 2 of them.
8 patties total?
Yeah, so if you remember the little jingle, it was really a total of 8 whole beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. And I ate those, and I went home, and I was sick. Now, in my infinite wisdom, I was in my 20s. In my infinite wisdom, I decided, well, clearly there was double the amount of meat. Meat is bad for me. That's it. I'm going to go vegetarian. Now, forget the fact that I had enough sodium and fat and everything else to kind of sustain a whole village for about a week. But I decided I'm going to give up meat. And I became vegetarian for about a year. And then as I explored it, I decided, you know what? I think I'm going to go vegan. That was over 2 decades, really when the internet wasn't the resource that it was today. It was very limited. I was speaking with Moby recently. He was on the podcast, and we were talking about the fact that back in the day, like we didn't have these internet resources. And really, the way that you would gather the information is you would go to these kind of small hole-in-the-wall health food stores. And we didn't have the big grocery stores. We didn't have the big health food stores that we do nowadays. You'd be talking with people in the aisles like, oh, what do you buy there? Oh, that's interesting. How do you cook that? And you'd speak with the clerks that work there or the owner of the place, and they'd give little cooking demos. And you'd be watching like, oh, look, they're cooking tofu up there. How do they do that? Are they using oil? And you just gather your information back then. It was probably a few years before I met another person that was actually vegan.
What was that like, meeting someone who was actually vegan?
You're doing this on your own and you're reading about it and you're gathering a little bit of information, but it's almost like you're kind of all by yourself. So it's kind of neat when you run into people that are exploring vegetarian and vegan food. So it's just kind of this instant connection as you start talking right away about food.
What introduced you to podcasting?
Well, like many people, I started listening to podcasts, and then I started listening to John Lee Dumas and hearing his podcast about entrepreneurs, and he was offering a course on getting into podcasting. So I ended up signing up for that and kind of diving in and really finding it to be quite enjoyable.
What do you like most about podcasting?
I think it's the connections. And it's the connection when you're speaking with a guest and interviewing somebody and learning more about their journey and their path. And then the connections that you have with people as they listen to that interview, to the story, and hearing from people from all over the world. It absolutely amazes me to hear from people as they're sharing their story with me and finding inspiration from listening to something that I've put out there. One of the main driving forces for me, as I mentioned, I started eating vegan over 2 decades ago. And there was a sense of, I don't know anybody that's doing this kind of thing. And then occasionally running into someone. And so a big hope with my podcast is that those that are eating vegan food are feeling a connection, that they can tune in. It's one of the reasons that I do it 5 days a week, is so that people can tune in and realize that, yeah, I might not know anybody in my town that's eating this way, although for a lot of people that's changing dramatically. It's really starting to grow. But I think that it allows people that sense that, oh, at least I know Mark is eating this way. So if I sit down today to have lunch, I know one other person. And then I heard Dr. Campbell on the show, and I know that he's eating vegan. And I heard Moby, and I know he's eating vegan. And so it's a way that people can feel a connection.
It's now roughly middle of 2016. By the end of this year, I'd like to be vegan. Is that reasonable? And if so, what would you suggest as sort of the initial first steps?
Oh, I think it's very reasonable. I think a lot of people will decide after, really exploring something like this that, okay, that's it. And they are going vegan right away. The interesting thing is that if you think about everything that you eat, you're probably eating a majority of your food that is vegan. So it's like, okay, you have to start eliminating the steak and you have to eliminate the cheese or you have to eliminate the fish. But along with that, you're having a side of peas and carrots and a large salad and a baked potato. So out of a dish with maybe 4 different items on it, only one of them may be an animal product. So that kind of shift can be easy in many different ways.
Any resources other than your wonderful podcast, but any other resources you might recommend to folks?
Well, I think that for resources, I think that I would start exploring in a few different areas. Number one is, of course, Facebook is a great place that you can find different groups and connect with others and start gathering information that way. But to look at why is it, and this is a big part of what I like to work on with people, because as you connect in with eating vegan food, it's really, really important to have a why. Why are you doing this? So I would say the top 3 are environmental reasons, animal reasons, and health reasons. And so if one of those connects for you, I would say look for a resource in that realm so that if it is, let's say, about your health, maybe picking up, Dr. Michael Greger's new book, How Not to Die, which speaks about the top 15 reasons that people in the United States are dying and how eating plant-based can dramatically improve your odds of not dying from that, at least. We're all going to die. We know that. It's not so much about the fact of avoiding death, but really living your life as healthy as possible. If it's about animals, connect in with exactly the work that you're doing, Harold, that you and Nancy do with your show. Connect in with animals. Find a real reason that this is important. I'm not going to eat a cow or a pig because it's just as precious as my cat or my dog. It's a living being that feels, that suffers, that wants to experience joy. So that would be really helpful, I think, as a resource, is connect in with what's important for you, whether it's about the animals, the health, or the environment.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. What are the environmental benefits of going vegan?
Well, let's just take, you're in California, and I am not somebody that really keeps track of the exact statistics, but it's something like, if you eat 1 pound of meat, or I let my shower run all day for several days, I'm using less water than you are by eating 1 pound of meat. So that kind of environmental impact is enormous, that people think that, oh, I'll just take a 15-minute shower and I'll save water. If you really want to make an environmental difference, stop eating animals, because it takes an enormous amount of resources and cutting down of trees and everything else to produce just 1 pound of meat.
Switching over to animal rescue, tell us a little bit about your relationships with your animals.
Yeah, well, currently I have a dog, a Maggie, and she's a rescue. And my fiance, Ingrid, she has a dog, Moxie, and he's a rescue. It's just very important to me that, having an animal in my life, number one, that's extremely important, of course, but that taking an animal from a shelter and giving it a home, giving it a loving home is just so important. I've adopted, dogs before, and I think that I'll always continue to take rescue animals in that way.
What are your first memories of an important animal in your life?
I remember my grandmother bringing over a dog, and I don't know if it was a rescue dog or not. I was a really young kid at the time. But having this little dog, and she was like my best friend as I was growing up. That connection and going outside. She was a tiny little, I don't even know what kind of dog she was. She was this tiny little thing. And we used to go outside and just run around the yard. And of course, there was no way I was keeping up with her. She's like, she was probably like 12 inches long. She was a tiny little dog, but that dog could run like lightning. And it used to be so fun to just run around the yard and play with her and just to interact that way. It was really special.
What kind of breed is your current dog?
So Maggie is, again, she's a rescue, so I don't know exactly, but I would say most likely she is probably 90% black lab. Moxie is mostly pit bull.
Okay, great. What was it like when you adopted Maggie? What was the experience like, and what's it been so far living with Maggie?
Well, it's been a very interesting ride. I ended up at one point, there was a stray cat near where I worked, and I was patting it, and all of a sudden somebody came around the corner and startled it, and it bit me. And I was like, oh no, I don't know this cat, and nobody knows who this cat belongs to. So I called up my doctor, and they said, well, there's really 3 options, I think it is. Number one, we can give you a tetanus shot. Give you a rabies shot, which is extremely painful, and you'll have to pay for it. Your insurance won't cover it. Number 2, we can kill the cat and take a look at its brain and then determine if it has rabies. Or 3, you can quarantine it, keep it for so many days, and if it doesn't react, then you're okay. Well, of course, I chose to just quarantine the cat and bring it home. The cat wasn't the friendliest cat, but I allowed it to stay in the house and took care of it. And at the end of the quarantine, it was perfectly fine. And so I contacted a rescue, and I said, I have this cat that is not connecting with me. It bit me, but it didn't bite me out of anything vicious. It was startled by some people coming around the corner. And I bring it in, and they said, certainly. So I brought it in. I dropped it off. They checked it out. They said, yeah, we'll take the cat. We have people that will take it. I'm like, okay, great. Thank you. And then I heard little barking going on. And I walked in, and they had this kennel that was filled. Harold, it was filled with puppies. And I just sat down with all these puppies that they had come in. And they're all like jumping all over me. And 2 of them were black labs, 2 females. They were very young, a little over, a few months old. And I'm just patting them. And this one just sits on my lap. And I'm like, uh-oh. I had no intention of this. I had lost a dog about a year prior that had passed away from just old age. And it was like, I had been taking some time to allow that to kind of fully processed before I jumped in and took in another dog. And, this dog is sitting on my lap, and I sat there like, oh my goodness, I want to adopt this dog. And then of course she had a sister there. And so I said to one of the people working there, I think I'll adopt both. And she said, and I'm so happy she said this. She said, have you ever had a puppy? And I'm like, well, no, not really that I can remember. Growing up, yeah, we had one given to us, but I was a kid. She said, it's a lot to take on 2 dogs at one time. What if you just took one? And I'm glad she did that
Mm.
because the potty training and the housebreaking and all of that took a little bit of time. And I think that if I had two, I don't think I would have been able to handle it all at the time.
Yeah, it is. It is double the work. So, how many years have you had Maggie, and what makes her special?
So I've had Maggie now for about 8 years, and she is not the dog that I wanted at the time. Like when I was sitting there with this puppy in my lap, I wanted this dog that would hug and snuggle and cuddle and be happy. The dog I had lost, that had passed away about a year prior, was one of these dogs that, we'd look at each other in the room and there was this instant connection. Like I just knew she would come over to me. There was this real deep connection. And with Maggie over the last 8 years, that cuddle, that hug, that snuggling is not there. And I've had to change what I wanted and accept what I have and fall in love with what I have. So Maggie is not the kind of dog that will just come running up to me and want to be snuggled. She'll come up and the tail will be going, but she doesn't want that close hug and, that big, big snuggle. But yet, if I'm working in the house, anytime I look over, she's watching everything I do. So there is this deep connection, but it's at her way of having that deep connection. And so that was a real practice to let go of, I want it this way, to realize I have this incredible love with this animal. It's on her way. I can accept that because I truly love her.
Okay. I mean, I can sense a little bit of the struggle, right? It's like you're so used to one way of living with an animal, and to have to make that adjustment, it's not easy, right? It is an adjustment.
It's the letting go of our preferences. I want it a certain way. As I say that, it's the same with vegan. It would be much easier to not be vegan as I'm driving down the street and I'm hungry because I could pull into, the fast food place. But having that deeper commitment, having something and saying, here's what's really important. I want this connection, to just eating great vegan food, so I'll keep going. And then the same with a dog. If I have a dog, if meeting her on her terms, it's just so much sweeter of letting go what I want. Then it becomes much richer to ultimately what I really want, which is a connection with another animal.
It's not always about you, right? If someone were to ask you, hey, Mark, why should I consider animal rescue? I mean, what would you say?
It's your heart just opens up in such a way. It's so beautiful when you start connecting in with other animals. For a long time before I actually adopted Maggie, and actually before I adopted the dog prior to her, I had been going into different shelters and had started thinking about actually volunteering. And I wasn't at the time able to make the commitment. And so instead, what I did is on a regular basis, I would go into the shelter, and I felt like the dogs often people would come in and take them outside and go for a little walk around the yard, but the cats weren't getting that. And so I used to just go in and I just, say, hey, I'm just going to take this cat. And they had a little room that you could bring cats into. And one at a time, I'd bring them in and just pat them and play with them and just give them some attention so they didn't have to spend time in their cage. And as you do those kinds of things, your heart just opens up even bigger than it was before. That kind of thing, compassion and kindness and love and care, if we can have a little more of that in the world, it's a better place. So animals bring that out in us. And let's take advantage of that, because you're going to make an enormous difference for the animal. They're going to love spending time with you if you're rescuing them, if they're going to appreciate it in the long run. But you yourself are going to change dramatically. You're going to be kinder, happier, more gentle. And that's a terrific kind of qualities to have in your life.
We're speaking to Mark Dillon. He's a host of the Mindful Vegan podcast, talking about a couple dogs in his life. Have you actually thought about, or have you seen, what are the trends in vegetarianism and veganism?
That's a good question. I don't know the numbers of how fast it's growing. I will say this. I have been seeing more and more it's becoming mainstream in many ways, or at least the awareness. Going back to when I first started eating vegan, I'd say to somebody, I don't eat that. No, thanks. I don't have that. Well, what are you doing? And I'd say, I eat vegan. And they'd say, vegan? What are you? Like, they didn't even understand the word vegan, what that was. And now You can go into many grocery stores, and on the front of some packages, it will say vegan. So in that sense, it's becoming more mainstream. And I think that as it's growing, it's people are seeing the benefits. It used to be that I think a lot of people that went vegan did it because of, animal care. Just this past weekend, I was in New Hampshire at the Veg Fest doing a presentation, and I asked the audience, how many of you are doing this for animals? How many for your health? How many for environmental? And I was shocked at the number of people that are doing it for environmental reasons.
Oh, really?
That to me that has really shifted over the last few years. That, 10 years ago, I don't think I knew anybody that had been doing this because of environmental reasons. So that's kind of exciting to see, and that it's becoming more mainstream in that way. And then the health side, I mean, if you look at somebody like, Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Die, it's a New York Times best-selling book right now. And people are getting much more aware that we can take pills. The average person at my age range, I think, is taking like 3 to 4 medications on a regular basis, prescribed medications. And if a lot of that, and it's funny, but it's also sad. A lot of that, if they just ate plant-based, they could completely eliminate it. I mean, it's just amazing to me when you look at not just, if you listen to my show, I don't have anybody that's kind of gotten their degree out of the back of a magazine or that, just kind of thinks that this is a good idea. I really ask for Dr. Greger, he went through the traditional training, Dr. Thomas Campbell, who is one of the co-authors of the China study. I mean, he's a real doctor, and the research that they do and that they've looked at, Dr. Greger was saying he's looked at over 700 research articles on plant-based food and things like that just this year, and he's looking for, like, where's the downside? Like, he's not saying this has to be the way. It's like, show me where the downside is. What's the negative? And he's just seeing so many positive things. So I met somebody the other day who he said that, prior to going vegan, he was living on his couch. He was not able to get up off his couch on a regular basis, and he was going to be housebound. That was it. And he completely shifted his diet to plant-based, and he's back living his life.
If people want to reach you, what is the best way to find Mark Dillon and the Mindful Vegan podcast?
Just go to mindfulvegan.com. Right there, you can see the podcast. You can click on the blog. You can reach me through the contact page. And of course, I'm on most of the social media as well, but mindfulvegan.com is easiest.
Okay. If you could wave that magic wand and do something for animal rescue, what would it be?
I would have everybody eat plant-based. They all go vegan, because it would make the greatest impact in the world when it came to not just the pets in our lives, but all the animals that we see out there. And so who knows, maybe someday we'll get there. I hope we will, at least.
Well, we're speaking to Mark Dillon, host of the Mindful Vegan podcast. Thank you so much for everything. Any last words? Any last thought that you'd like to share?
I think just that the work that you and Nancy are doing is really one of the ways that we can deeply connect to making a difference for others, and that's other animals. And then hopefully from there, we can keep making a difference for ourselves by starting to go plant-based. But I really think that as we look at that connection with the other animals on this planet, we want to say that we are the top of everything here, then it's our responsibility to do everything we can to prevent as much suffering in the world and to help others. And that means helping the animals as well.
We want to say thank you to Mark Dillon for sharing his story. You don't have to be a vegan to listen to his show. I'm not a vegan, and I listen to his show all the time. It's very educational and very inspiring. If you want to learn more about Mark Dillon's Plant-Based Conversations, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/77. If you'd like to nominate someone to be a guest on Pawprint, you can email us at thisispawprint@gmail.com or go to our contact page, thisispawprint.com/contact. Don't forget that you can also sign up for our email list and receive a couple of resources from our favorite positive reinforcement dog trainer, Irit Bloom. Simply go to thisispawprint.com/ask to sign up. You can find me or Nancy on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Our long-term foster Curry just got adopted. Yay! So you can see some photos of him in celebration mode on our page. Simply find us at This Is Paw Print, all one word. Find us on your favorite podcast app, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music. Look for Paw Print Animal Rescue. Find us and subscribe to get the latest episodes immediately. We just want to say thanks for sharing Paw Print with your friends and family. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time with another great guest on Paw Print.
Paw Print is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.